Hi, I'm Hannah Wallace and welcome to FinextraTV. With us in the studio today is Monica Sasso, Global Financial Services Digital Transformation Lead at Red Hat. So Monica, it's great to have you back in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Hannah. Always nice to have a chat with you.
Really good to have you on, and it's the first time we've caught up this year. So I'm eager to hear the headlines. What have been the big shifts across the financial services industry landscape? What are your macro predictions, and what should be front of mind as a result of those?
So Hannah, as you know, I like to do things in threes. It's easier for me to remember. The first one is operational resilience. That's been front of mind for quite some time now, and it's crystallizing because of the timing of some of the regulations that are hitting, and we'll go into more details on that in a second. The second one is you'd be living in a cave if you didn't think it was a trend, and that was generative AI. The powers that has to transform the back, middle, and front offices are phenomenal, as well as obviously impact the client journey. So that's a huge trend. And the last trend that we're looking at is really firms are really starting to spend lots of time thinking about how they can modernize their tech stack in a concerted manner to reduce tech debt. And that has lots of advantages, giving them a solid base to build their AI foundations on and things like that.
And as you say, we're going to go into a bit more detail. Let's start with operational resilience, because that really is front of mind. But I want to know why. Why is it crucial now?
So there was a recent speech by the Bank of England early March around how to look at critical third-party providers, which in this context would be public cloud providers, and how that is combined with some of the UK op-res rules. We'll say op-res because it's easier than operational resilience, and then how it dovetails with the DORA regulation in the EU, the Digital Operational Resiliency Act, another mouthful, and other regulations that are starting to emerge around the world. So all these things are kind of coalescing now. And I think us as consumers, we've seen some of these things already play out. We had a Greggs outage, and Greggs, I mean, who does not want to not get their sausage roll and coffee in the morning? There were some issues with taking digital payments in Sainsbury's recently. You know, so you're seeing all these things play out. And I don't think it's been fully appreciated by us as consumers how interconnected these things are from an economics point of view, and how much actually the technology firms, and banks' systems really do touch every day of our interactions, even if it is at Greggs.
Yeah.
So this is really focusing a conversation with customers around how they can have, build resilient IT stacks and resilient firms. And obviously, of course, the natural progression is into cybersecurity and how all this plays when you start to open up, your digital kimono, so to speak, or capitalize on some of the services that are in the public cloud. How do you continue to have that solid, safe base to protect our money and our mortgages and our futures? So that's really, the why piece.
Some good examples there. And I suppose I want to hear a bit more about sort of the advice leading off from that then. What should banks be considering when they're really trying to understand operational resilience frameworks?
I mean, I think, again, threes, because they're easy. Number one, it's holistic, right? It's not just about technology. You want to be a resilient firm. You want to modernize in a resilient manner. It has to be about your people, your processes, your talent, your ways of working, who's in your ecosystem, as well as your technology. And when you start to look at your technology, it also should, think about your software supply chain, having software bills and materials, all of these things. It's not just a kind of a one and done thing. It's almost a new way of working, or rather it becomes the de facto operating model where you have to think about resilience from multiple lenses rather than just a resilient, for example, having a resilient P&L. Or in the past, after '08, regulators focused on having resilient capital. Now it has to be everything. The second one is it has to be cross-functional. We're definitely seeing this move to much more of cross-functional teams, much more cross-functional decision-making. I was speaking at a conference in February this year, and the topic of 3 lines of defense came up. And there was a big debate, and it actually ended up quite positively, but I was very vocal in saying I love the 3 lines of defense. I like why it's there, but I'm not convinced that it supports making fast decisions in a modern world where technology is at the core of everything. So I do think this is where we need to engage much more across all of the different functions in an organization to try to define what a resilient organization is and how we make decisions moving forward. And then the third one is, I think this is really where I get quite passionate about this. being a Red Hatter, which is all about open and collaborative and community. And I think a lot of these problems, as I illustrated in the beginning when I talked about Greg's and Sainsbury's and a bank and a hyperscaler, when on earth would you put all those things in the same sentence? Never, right? Now, guess what? These are problems that we need to solve as a community.
Yeah.
So coming together and collaborating in an open manner so that we can sort out the interconnected nature, that technology has brought us amazing benefits, but it's also connected us in ways that we didn't know, that we don't know about and don't appreciate. So this is really where, mirroring the open source software community and how we collaborate, I think could really help move the needle from a resiliency point of view.
All right, that's interesting. Some sound advice there, and interesting to hear what Red Hat is doing in that space. And another area you highlighted at the start is generative AI. By no means a new one, but certainly a growing trend as well. And one of the big questions that surround generative AI is how companies can ensure positive outcomes, because there are some challenges surrounding it still, aren't there? So maybe you could talk about those for us.
Sure. I've been asked a lot about AI recently, as I'm sure you can guess. And I think the first point I'll make is it's been around a long time. And it's been around in banks for many years. For things like fighting fraud, helping reduce friction in payments and things like that. Where we start to look a little bit more in depth when we look at generative AI and the use cases, there's a whole lot of additional things you can think about from a KYC point of view, from an AML point of view. But I would really say there's so much out there that you actually have to go back to basics. What business problem are you trying to solve for? We can't just be buying a shiny toy because it's a new buzzword. So that's kind of the first area that I think I would look at. I think also it's an opportunity for banks, actually for banks as well, to capitalize on the data that they already have. And they can get to that utopia point of having a segment of one, so that all the decisions that are made for you, Hannah, are actually just for you and your partner and your future and your life, because they have all this data about you, and now they can connect it using generative AI in a way that actually suits your financial future better. So I do think this is, again, another use case, and it helps firms get to that segment of one, which is the utopia space, really for them. And I think when we start to look at some of the challenges and the pitfalls, there's lots out there, almost too much, I think, in lots of different ways. Yeah. And ultimately, the regulators are really, especially in the UK with things like the consumer duty, regulators are really going to be looking at making sure you get the right and the best outcome for you, Hannah, or for me, Monica. It can't just be for all women or all people who live in London. It has to be the right outcome. And you're starting to see that now in the press, where banks are getting fined, or they might be getting a slap on the wrist, or insurance companies as well, because it's using technology to not drive the best outcome for you, if that makes sense. So I think that's going to be an interesting interplay to see how that works. And then, of course, you've got, the US and the UK have just signed agreements around how to look at the algorithms, and then EU AI Act as well is another one that's out there. So all these things are starting to come together, which then kind of brings me to the challenges bit. And I think the first big challenge actually is around ethics.
Yes.
It's going to be around ethics, and it's going to be around educating the decision makers about the impact of the decisions they make. Because a lot of the decision makers are not AI experts or not ethical AI experts. I don't think anybody really is. I also think there's going to be a huge challenge around talent. It's not insurmountable because the banks employ millions, tens of millions across Europe and across the UK of very, very talented people. It's just about making sure they get retrained and that you've got the right people in the right jobs at the right time. And I also think that last bit, again, I'm going to double down on it. It's upskilling everybody.
All right, thank you for that, Monica. And I know you wanted to talk a bit about how AI is being used to combat fraud as well. That's a really interesting one. So talk us through how data science is being used in this space as well.
As I said, it's been being used for quite some time, but where it starts to get really interesting with new technologies like generative AI is when you start to look at that AML, or anti-money laundering, and KYC, know your customer or know your client checks. You can almost predict if I'm in, let's say I'm traveling on holiday or traveling on business, where if I'm going to be in New York, then you know I'm going to be there and I'm going to be spending money in New York. So you're automatically going to say, actually, that's not a fraudulent payment. Equally, it can start to help reduce friction in the onboarding process, which is fraught with risk, in the sense of I come in and I want to be a new customer or a new client. I put my address in. I guess I can use my real address because it's only me on the telly saying it. If I put For the Gables in, it would be much easier to use generative AI to go and check Google Images or Google Maps and say, actually, For the Gables really is a house versus it's not a house. In the past, you'd have to have a person, picking up a telephone book or going and looking at OS maps or whatever to verify if For the Gables really is a house. So you can appreciate that also that's a really easy way to also combat terrorist financing and people that are trying to use fake addresses and things like that. So all these things really do help combat fraud and reduce the baddies from opening up bank accounts and then obviously messing things up for the rest of us. So those are some really interesting use cases, but ultimately at the end of the day, AI is about removing risk from a transaction by trying to predict what you may or may not be doing. This is really where we can use the technology to reduce false declines, for example. So again, going back to the traveling example, again, to remove and reduce the friction in any onboarding process, whether that be for due diligence or whether that be for you applying for your next mortgage or your credit card, anything like that. So you can start to add these technologies with automation, and then you'll start to see things happen a whole lot faster and actually a whole lot safer with, typically, if you get it right, an audit trail.
So we've covered the challenges, but also the positives
Yep.
as well with AI, which there are plenty of, and I think it's worth another discussion further down the line to see how we've moved on. But I want to talk a bit about technical debt and mainframe modernisation as well, a really interesting area, and how we can get the old and the new to work together. So tell us, what have been the setbacks to date, and what are the trends going forward in this space as well?
So this, for me, is my favorite topic because for me, it's about resilient modernization. It's about thinking about everything from beginning to end and doing it right. I think the first point is it's a long journey. And the reason why now it's starting to come out or come to the fore, I think one is we understand a whole lot more about how, we can work with our customers and banks even, how their older technology, if you will, well, it is older technology, it's my age and older, how it all works, why it's there, and how it all interacts. And now we're starting to be able to see many more use cases where there is a desire to use modern technology with the older technology. So I think people are now considering it as a journey versus a one and done. I think there's reasons why. The first might be commercial reasons. There also might be talent reasons. But the last one is exactly what I just articulated, right? Or I guess that was the first one, which is really they're starting to see there's actually value in doing this. There's value in unleashing some of the data that might be in a different location in the firm. You can actually now start to use newer technologies with it. Or if you want to take older systems and then use newer services on them, you can open up your system to a different market, for example, or create a new value stream. So that's kind of the long journey bit. I think we're starting to see this play out now in specific use cases, whether that be in the payment space. We keep hearing about real-time payments, whether that be cross-border now is going to be another one, which that could be another conversation for another day.
Yes.
Cross-border real-time payments need lots of AI and fraud checks on that one.
Yes.
But all jokes aside, payments modernization, we're starting to see a lot of that come out is actually how can we, modernize here, but combine it with the newer stuff over here that we might have created for PSD2 or for open banking, for example, and then actually combine the two and start to offer new business lines like embedded finance. So that's the kind of the where bit. But I think, lastly, this is about reducing complexity in the organization.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Where you have complexity, you have different ways of monitoring your estate. So if you've got 10 different, I'm making it up, right? 10 different platforms, you'll have 10 different monitoring tools. That's impossible to manage. Well, it's not impossible to manage, but it's ridiculous to manage. And if you have these 10 different ways to monitor it, that means you've got 10 different ways to look for vulnerabilities, to look for threats, and to do things like that. So if you have a single pane of glass, for lack of a better way of describing it, you really do reduce that risk and you reduce complexity. So that's also where we then go back full circle into cybersecurity and go back into full circle into resilience. And I think furthermore, right, if you have that simple, solid foundation, you have a common platform then for your developers and your data scientists to go and explore new toys, whether that be AI, whether that be generative AI, same thing, or even just new different systems or applications or anything like that. Giving everybody a common ground reduces complexity, it makes it easier to grow, and it allows you to have a simpler story to your regulator when they come in and they say, hey, listen, you know, we want to make these changes, but if you only have one common base to make a change against, it's a whole lot easier to get buy-in to modernizing.
So Monica, thank you so much for your predictions today and indeed advice going forward. So thank you very much.
My pleasure as always. Thank you, Hannah.